Hey, once again, welcome to Tarot Tuesday. Today I'm going to tackle a terrifying topic, the scary cards of the tarot deck. If you've been following along, I am at the number 13 card in my exploration of the Major Arcana of Tarot over the last couple of months. This is one of the big ones, right? When people who don't understand tarot approach the topic, they're terrified of the scary cards in the deck. And I'm really curious, if you read tarot for people, how you handle some of that subject matter. And I'd love to learn more from you in the comments below. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of the forthcoming book, Chasing Quicksilver, an exploration of the confluence of science and soul. And I've been exploring the archetypes of tarot over the last couple of months. Today, the Death card. Now, in my approach to reading tarot, which as I've shared with you before, I do infrequently, I read birthday cards and Christmas cards, basically special occasions for close friends and family and reflections for myself. I work in a professional context in a suit and tie on a day-to-day basis, and this has been a hobby of mine for a very, very long time. And tarot is a symbolic set that I have studied among many other symbolic sets. If you watch my last video, I did an exploration of astrology in my soul mapping video. So today, the Death card. Death is a scary subject. We're all fearful of the unknown, and this is a pattern in human history. It has been for a very long time. And our society in particular, we have pushed our experience, our direct relationship with death into hidden corners. When people get old and infirm, they tend to be put in homes, or they age out of sight, and we don't have the encounter of death or the experience of death or the vocabulary of death in the society that we live in, and haven't for a very long time. Now, we go back a century and a half ago, the average life expectancy for a man was about 45 years old. And part of that is infant mortality rates. There was very, very high infant mortality, and frequently either babies would die in childbirth, women would die in childbirth without the medical kind of science that we have now, and the survival rates for women and children was much lower. And we had lots of kids. This is not nature. Nature builds in redundancies. Fish lay tens of thousands of eggs for only a couple to survive due to predators and environment and that sort of thing. And the human being is no different from that. And so starting at the beginning of life, we encountered death. We had a vocabulary of it. This was part of our human experience. And then medical technology came along. Birth rates went up. Survival rates for maternal survival in birth went way up. Our population exploded as a consequence, because while we were able to solve the problems, health problems related to childbirth, infant mortality, and maternal mortality, we hadn't yet invented birth control. So we had this tremendous explosion of global population because we forestalled death. And through the early 20th century, there was lots of ideas that were fairly common that persisted and were residual of this kind of human experience, is that we should let more people die because it's part of a natural process. And from our world right now, that sounds horrifying to just let people die. But anyway, that was part of the 20th century, kind of figuring out new ways of being human, and along the way, that medical technology advanced our life so that our average life expectancy now, I'm in a developed nation in G7 in Canada, our life expectancy for a woman, 83, 84 years old. And depending on what age that person is now, and for a man a couple of years younger, there is a death gap between men and women that lots of people don't talk about or acknowledge. But men live shorter lives than women, and there may be a bunch of reasons for that. Now, one of the big things when reading tarot, and that death card comes up, and I'm sure that you've read in books because this is a really common topic, is you want to make sure that a querent understands that if the death card comes up, or some big scary one like the Tower, or like the Devil, or even the Judgment card, the number 20, that can have some sort of scary effects on people, is that death card doesn't mean a literal death, or infrequently does. And if you've read tarot for any little while, you've read some ideas or come across some ideas about tarot ethics, we realize that the words that we have create our reality. We have a responsibility as readers when we're sharing with a querent to frame the question, to frame the archetype in a way that doesn't plant ideas in people's minds. And so we want to kind of pull back from it. I speak about these things in terms of archetype, and that's been my approach all along, if you've been following. And the archetype of death is something that we are confronted with in our world today. It started in early January with the realization of a novel coronavirus and a global pandemic, as we've all experienced. Now, death is the end of something and the beginning of something else in symbolic language. So death can be a divorce, the death of the marriage. A death can be the loss of a job, the death of a career. A death can be an experience that we have individually. It can be an experience we have as a family. It can be an experience that we have culturally and globally, is what we're having now. And one of the big things, if you're counseling somebody in reading tarot and this death card comes up, is that we know through psychology and science that people kind of have a limited number of responses to being confronted with death. So on a big scale, there are now more than 1 million people globally who've died of the coronavirus. We're seeing spikes in the United States. The area that I live in Canada, is we're flirting with being declared a red zone again. The province of Quebec, which is just across the river, the border from us, has declared again a 28-day moratorium or ban on social gatherings to try and stop the spread of the disease until we can find some kind of cure or vaccine. And in the States, we're seeing the numbers. So this is like the 27th, 28th of September as of this recording. The cases had dropped down into the 30,000-ish cases a day, 33, 35,000 after a summer spike. And unfortunately, in the last couple of days, it spiked up to 55,000 again. We're going into flu season. We're going into cold season. We're going into the season where pneumonia spreads. And the 1-2 concern of coronavirus and seasonal illnesses that compound to complicate the coronavirus infection is humbling, let's say. We're confronted with daily death tolls. And in the United States now, more than 200,000 people have died. Projections, I think, realistic are going to be that by the end of the year, more than 400,000 people will have died. So, I mean, we're talking about October, November, December. And that accelerating number of death toll is something that we're going to be hearing a lot more about. In my opinion, this is all quite frightening, but we have a technology and we have a good communication system. We, as responsible citizens, we can take steps to protect ourselves and understand this clearly. Why am I saying this? Well, look, we can see the responses to death in the various groups in the society that we live in. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross decades ago came up with this 5 stages of death and dying, and it really ties to more of a broader, just like the death card in tarot, it has a broader application. The 5 stages of death and dying have to do with grieving. And grieving a loss. So the same pattern can apply when a marriage collapses and there's a death of a marriage. The same patterns of emotions and experiences can apply if someone loses their job or their career and there is a death of a career or a death of a friendship or a death of a certain stage of life. And those 5 stages of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So how do we see this writ large in the world of coronavirus, where we've sanitized death out of our normal awareness, we've increased our life, we've got better health, and death is something that we've pushed away from us over the decades. And now it's confronting us again. The pale horse rides in with the rider, and we're confronted with this in our society. And how do we see these different representations or these different manifestations of our encounter with death? Well, the first one is denial. It's a hoax, right? I'm sure you've heard this. Denial that it's serious, denial that it's killing people, denial that it can spread. There's a whole cohort of people, particularly in the United States, where there has not been consistent messaging from leadership in the White House and at a federal level, and not just lack of leadership, but an active disinformation campaign and a downplaying of the seriousness of the coronavirus. This is denial. Everything's going to be fine. This is just a passing thing. No problem. It's a hoax. It's not true. No, I'm not. In the case of an individual, no, I'm not going to die. That can't possibly be true. And then we get the anger. So the anger manifests as a second stage. And we see the degree of anger in society, the resentment at, you can't make me wear a mask. This is all about control. This is all, because this is a hoax, of course, you're impacting on my freedom. And we get a cohort of people online and in the streets who are protesting against this, and they're bringing their guns to legislatures in the United States. This was happening over the summer, and a pushback, a hard pushback against anyone who is actually further along in the process of this grieving. So grieving that we're experiencing is grieving of a loss of a way of life, at least a temporary one. We've been confronted with, grieving the loss of my commute, grieving the loss of traffic, grieving the loss of, there's all kinds of stuff that we're missing out on in life, and there's all kinds of difficulties that have been imposed on us because of this coronavirus. And some of those things that we've lost are, I don't miss them, quite honestly. But some of the things that we've lost are worthy of grief. And in that shock, we're all going through different emotions, and we're all at different stages. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Because when you're reading for somebody and the death card comes up and there is a pattern of change in life and someone is dealing with grief, these are the 5 things that death brings along with it when we're confronted with death. Okay? So bargaining. How is bargaining manifesting in society that we're living in? Well, I've given you a pattern of 2, the denial and the anger. I'm curious what you think how bargaining is manifesting itself in the world at large. Have you experienced some form of bargaining? Maybe in my own life, I think about, like if we just go to this cottage with some friends that are there, it'll be okay. The chances are low, and I'm gonna bargain a little bit with the boundaries of what is recommended by health professionals. Now, fortunately, I don't do that. We did that once with a group of people. We knew the people involved. We all knew that they were keeping a tight social circle and weren't actively out in high risk engagements with the world. But we're making those bargains. And it's okay if I just. It's okay if I just. If I just do this, it'll be okay. That's a form of bargaining. Now, depression. I don't know about you, but in the initial phases of the lockdown, I know that myself, people in my family, friends of mine, all expressed anxiety, some degree of terror. There was a lot of paranoia early on when we didn't understand the transmissibility and the degree of transmissibility of this. We didn't know where it was in our communities because we didn't have control of it. That was the whole idea of the lockdown in the first place, was to get control of the virus, to be able to contact trace it, to be able to know where it is, to be able to measure the spread and determine what the vectors were within the community. So that early period of time, because depression and anxiety are deeply interrelated, lots of people experience that and may still be experiencing it. I know of a number of people that I've worked with over the years who are seniors. We're now into October almost, and they have still really not left their homes. They have food brought to them. They're keeping an extremely tight circle. And this is one of the factors, one of the big concerns that medical professionals have, and we hear from people who are in the denial and anger phase, is that the cure can't be worse than the disease. And the impact of being cloistered with family or without family, if you're single and you're all by yourself and you're having to go through this without human interaction, extremely difficult. Acceptance. Well, at a certain point, we may all reach this degree of acceptance. We can maybe get through another winter with this mentality that this is a hoax, but pretty soon reality presents itself to us in an overwhelming way. Death makes himself known, and we just have to be willing and ready to accept that this is in our communities and that we have to behave in certain ways. Now, those 5 stages apply anytime you're dealing with an incidence of grief, an end of something, and a beginning of something else. Years ago, I read the works of Carlos Castaneda. Some people are familiar with Carlos Castaneda. He wrote a book about called The Yaqui Way of Knowledge. Yaqui is spelled Y-A-Q-I, and he was an anthropologist at the University of California, Berkeley, if I'm not mistaken, in the late 50s, early 60s. He went into the southwestern deserts in search of a shaman or a brujo or a medicine man to take him and a friend and introduce them to peyote in traditional medicine and magic. And he met a Yaqui brujo by the name of Don Juan Matus. And Don Juan Matus shared an expression early in in the series of Carlos Castaneda's books and his accounts of these journeys, that you have to live your life as if death is riding on your shoulder. You have to recognize that death is stalking you at every moment of your life, and that we must never lose sight of this ever-present nature of death in our lives and in our existence, because that compels us to find value and inspiration and to take command and charge of the lives that we live and make the most of every single day that we have. Understanding that death rides on our shoulder and is ever present in our existence, just out of arm's reach, just out of sight, gives us, in my opinion, an extremely inspiring stance to take in life. You know what? What is it? YOLO, you only live once, right? Gives us an opportunity and an impetus and a push to take advantage of opportunities every single day. Now, what's another pattern of death that we go through every year? Well, last week we crossed over the fall equinox. That's where the daylight is equal in time, 12 hours, to nighttime, 12 hours. And we're going through the fall season, which is actually part of the seasonal cycle of birth and life and death. So trees are pulling their energy into the ground. The leaves are starting to fall in the region that I live in. They're turning red and gold. And yellow. It's a orange, gorgeous year this year. For some reason, this is a great year for leaves. And this is a process of death and decay. But we know that in the calendar year, in the astronomical year, in the 4 seasons and the wheel of life, that death is always followed by rebirth. My name is Shannon Douglas. This has been Tarot Tuesdays, an exploration of the death card number 13. I'd love to get your inputs on this. What do you think about this kind of approach if it comes up in a reading for you, to recognize the kind of processes that people are going through with their grief and their different stages of it? How do you handle the tough cards in a reading? I'd love to find out. Make sure you like and subscribe, and stay tuned. I run another series called Soul Mapping, where I explore symbolic sets from around the world. I'm gonna do a little drill into the chakra system coming up pretty soon. Lots of people are familiar with this Eastern yoga structure of the psyche, and I'm going to work through that and compare it to a couple of other symbolic sets that we know in the Western tradition.